And next we'll hear from Kristin Baja from the Office of Sustainability in Baltimore, Maryland. Kristin.
All right, great. All right, so thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it. And I just want to see a quick show of hands. How many of you have actually been to Baltimore? Wow, all right. That is so different than most of the audiences I talk to, so that's great. How many of you really enjoyed Baltimore? All right, even better. Fantastic. So I'm going to talk today about something a little bit different, and that is really thinking about climate planning and climate change and utilizing equity as a lens for how we're doing this. We are going to have obviously populations that are more vulnerable to impacts and are going to be impacted more than others already are. And so it's really important to make sure that we are considering equity in all the work that we're doing, and that's really what we're doing here in Baltimore City. So just in case, because most people actually, when I go to a crowd like this, have no idea where Baltimore is. They're like, oh, when I drive from DC to New York, there's that place that I see before I go into the tunnel, but I never know what it is. But Baltimore is located at the top of the Chesapeake Bay, so we're having water come up the bay, and we're also at the base of 4 major watersheds. So we basically have water coming from everywhere. At the same time, Maryland, lucky enough, is sinking into the ocean slowly. So we have some really unique and fun things going on with water in this area. One of the things that we're considering in Baltimore City is utilizing the required all-hazard mitigation plan from the federal government and actually incorporating climate change into that. So we're going a little bit against what you're supposed to do and saying that climate change is real, and we're actually acknowledging it and we're using it in all of our messaging. For us, though, it's the word resilience seems to be actually working with a lot of our funders and partners. So we change the language a lot. It depends on who we're talking to. With residents or business owners, we're often talking about disaster preparedness. With our funding community or with our private partners, it's going to be more about resilience. I'm not going to read our definition of resilience, but one of the things I really want to point out is that we're really thinking about how to positively adapt and thrive. And that's really important, and I think a key component to what we're doing with all of our climate planning. Another thing that we look at is instead of just looking at shocks, we're also considering stressors. So what are we seeing on an everyday that we need to be considering in addition to the shocks? What's going to be exacerbated by the shocks? You guys know a lot more about the everyday stressors than I do. That is not my area of expertise, but it's something that I touch on and try to get into a lot. And we have a lot of them in Baltimore. A lot of things going on with epidemic violence, high unemployment, and other issues when we have a shock that become even worse. Just a quick image. I'm not going to go into the background, but these are just things that have happened. These are pictures from my iPhone that have happened in the last few years. I've only been in Baltimore for 4.5 years. I'm actually originally from Detroit. And the things that have happened since I've been there have been fascinating and magnificent as far as a disaster perspective. So the retaining wall collapse in the upper right-hand corner, people trying to drive through 6 inches of rain that's fallen in just a few hours. We might see another storm like that in the lower left-hand corner tomorrow. And then something called a derecho, which most people had no idea what that was until 2012, but came through at one of our highest heat waves and knocked out power for about 7 days, and that was intense with about 95 plus for that period of time. So for us, pretty much everything in this region is about to get more severe and more intense, and that's what we talk about when talking with anybody. But the biggest piece, I think, that has been left out of a lot of the conversations is actually the stressors and how are we talking about equity and what are we really talking about when we're working with the community. For us, in Baltimore, it's about acknowledging the past. When I get up, first of all, I'm usually allergic to PowerPoints. I don't usually use them. I walk around a lot. I don't ever wear a suit, so this is different. But it's about acknowledging that pretty much our historic planning practices in Baltimore have been intentionally racist and have segregated populations, and that I am a privileged individual who did not have the impacts of that, and I need that to be acknowledged ahead of time. So I walk into a room and acknowledge it first thing, and then ask if people are willing to sit down and have conversations with me, and I want to listen, and I want to hear about their stories. I want to hear about displacement and what it means for their commute and what it means for their daily lives. So really acknowledging the past being a key component of how we're approaching our climate work. One of the things, I'm sorry, it's a little bit of a blurry slide, but that's important to also know about Baltimore is the black butterfly and the white L. So pretty much when you look at our city, There is a black butterfly where people African Americans have been basically told they can live since the 1910 ordinance of black blocks, white blocks. And the white L, which is where most of our transportation and also the inner harbor is. This is a document put together by Lawrence Brown that basically shows the advantage in the white L versus the black butterfly in regards to certain policies and practices. And I showed it here. This is actually something where it's just showing our different socioeconomic statuses in Baltimore. So African Americans are in blue. You can see the butterfly. Again, our low income is lighter. Again, in the butterfly, and then our unemployment in red. So it's very, very prevalent, and when we do overlays of all of our different data, it shows up very strongly. And I know a lot of people use this image, and I actually don't like this image, and there's a reason for it. If you look, the person on the right, who's smaller, is already considered somebody who's disadvantaged. They're smaller. They're considered not as equal. And that's a problem. If that's how we see people, that's how we're going to see them in regards to planning. What we need to do is actually show there's a lack of access to resources based on certain practices and plans that we've put in place. So yes, we need to remove barriers, but we need to remove barriers for all people of all the same size and hopefully different skin colors as well. So an image that I think is good for showing that we want to remove barriers, but also an image that I think has faults based on the fact that we show one person who's at least lesser than others. So what do we do as far as using equity as a lens? Well, I'll go into a lot about what we do with community outreach and how we engage. But it's really about prioritizing neighborhoods that have the highest vulnerability and also the historic disinvestment. Like I mentioned, active listening. So really changing up the style and the way that we're actually engaging with folks. And thinking about different opportunities in all of our different initiatives. So instead of just saying we're going to do something like an infrastructure change, we're going to come in and put in a pretty park, we need to think about the whole system and the whole neighborhood. And so for us, it's really about getting into this active engagement. We have really stayed away from meetings that have any PowerPoint or any sort of presentation. It's more about interaction, engagement. We try to make sure that folks who have been ignored or don't have the resources to get to these meetings, that we're going to them. They're choosing the location that they have the meeting in. They're identifying for us a place that they trust, whether that be their home, their church, their community center, and that's where we'll have the meeting. And we usually will bring some sort of element that's interactive and fun so that there's a giveaway or an incentive to be there, as well as food and free childcare. And we also try to provide transportation for those who don't have access. This is just an image of some of our meetings. Again, like I mentioned, we really try to call out some of the inequity that's existed in Baltimore for a while. So that's actually a 24-foot long wall that we built. It's mostly tape and pieces of paper, to be honest with you, but it's the historic racism and practices in Baltimore City as they relate to sustainability and resilience, and where we've seen changes and where we have things that we still need to work on. It also asks residents, what are your definitions of equity and sustainability, and where do you see the overlaps? And then we actually ask people, what are they going to do? How are they going to be part of this? We're looking for implementation partners, not just for feedback for a plan that, again, sits on a shelf, as I think a lot of other speakers have talked about. So implementation, this is one of the prettier pictures I think you're going to see of Baltimore. It's one of the only ones where you're going to see green. We don't have a lot of parks in the city, but this is Druid Hill Park looking out over the city to the south. We have a plan that doesn't sit on a shelf. I actually use it on a daily basis with 231 actions around resiliency. It's our disaster preparedness plan. It's available online if you want to look at it. But the idea is we're looking at a whole block approach, really considering neighborhoods and going in and thinking about them in all the different areas. And thinking about not just the built infrastructure, but also what are the other opportunities with natural systems and public services. One of the bigger things that we started with immediately, and one of the keys that I think has really led to a lot of other programs, is enhancing community preparedness. And people would always ask us, well, what do we do? You know, you basically scared the heck out of us by telling us everything that's going to happen, so what do we actually do? So we started with some of the simple things. This is what I would call maybe a Band-Aid program until we were able to start some of the bigger stuff. But we go into making plans, building kits, and helping each other. Making plans pretty easy. We sit with folks and actually help them create an emergency plan and identifying their evacuation or their opportunities for sheltering in place. We build emergency kits together. So we don't actually just hand one out and say, here's your emergency kit. We talk through every single item that's in the emergency kit, how to hand crank the radio, what it means, what the little panel on the top is. It's actually solar that you can use for charging your phone, and go through just things that people don't use on a daily basis. And then the help each other part is the really most important piece, and that's kind of doing a lot of asset mapping with community members to identify what exists in the community now and what is missing. Another piece is Baltimore is a city of row houses. A lot of you have been there, so you know this. So we have really, really tiny streets and a lot of houses packed into those streets. And so we developed something that's actually helping emergency managers and actually first responders within the community by putting help safe signs in the window. One side says safe, and you just put it up, and so that people know you don't need additional assistance, or there's a sign that says help, and that actually helps our community emergency response teams who are volunteers, as well as our emergency responders in the event of an emergency. We did manage to get a lot of these out before the riots in 2015, and I found that a lot of people did use them in the communities that we had done outreach in. Unfortunately, we haven't been able to hit all 265 neighborhoods, so that was a shortcoming. Well, through the Make a Plan, Build a Kit, we did have one missing piece, and that is a lot of residents didn't have access to a vehicle. They didn't have access to opportunities to evacuate, and they weren't planning on leaving if they did. And so they also just didn't know what meal they were going to have that night. They're not setting aside extra food or extra water because they're dealing on the day-to-day with their 3 jobs or where they're getting their kids. And so the other pressures that don't allow them to proactively prepare. And the biggest thing was they don't have a safe place to go with sort of trusted information. So we are currently piloting a concept that I don't think has been done in any other city to date, although I know that Los Angeles has taken some particular interest in this. But it's called Resiliency Hubs. And essentially, in working with members of the community, we're identifying these neighborhood sites that are trusted. Often they are churches or community centers that have an existing use that's used on a daily basis, that we go in and provide the funding to enhance or make the building more resilient by putting on solar with battery backup and generators, providing them with storage and materials to store, backup food, backup water, and information at each one of the sites. So our hubs are being used right now for a lot of other programming, and we're actually working with the health department to make sure that these are also going to be locations where a lot of the public health programs come out of. Again, that's not my area of expertise, but I have an awesome Baltimore City Health Department rocks. So it's great because they work with me a lot, and so we're working on making sure that these are hubs for a lot of these other programs as well. And so right now we have 4 hubs in blue, and as you can see the black butterfly on there, it's the areas that we're sticking to. And then the 2 green ones that are potentially going to happen in the next year. Another key piece I was asked to talk about is what we're doing with sort of peer-to-peer engagement and what we call our ambassador program. We have a network of over 150 ambassadors that help with outreach. Like I mentioned, I do not look like the majority of people who live in Baltimore City, and that has to be clear and acknowledged. But I also have a lot of information that I want to make sure people have. So we've been training over the last year a network of ambassadors who go out and actually have conversations with people through sort of a tiered network where we've divided the city into 10 districts, assigned a team leader to each district, and then we have a lead ambassador and several ambassadors within that district. They've gone through a variety of trainings. We've provided trainings on equity and sustainability for each one of those ambassadors, and then we provide them with toolkits that have surveys, draft presentations, other things. They've actually helped in designing the toolkits, which has been great because we make sure that they get what they need. Another key piece of it has really been how are we taking all the stories and the information that we're gathering from people and actually making use of it, instead of just saying, thank you so much for telling us about what you think should be in the plan. Hooray. Instead, we're actually showing a way that we're using this information. And one of the ways is through our communications campaign called Every Story Counts. We are not calling out anything that happens in Baltimore City government. It's actually a communications campaign about the amazing people that live in Baltimore that are doing things on their own without support. And so it's a pretty fantastic campaign. I would take a look at it. This is one of our profiles that was just up recently. I would say we're kind of going against some of the things we don't believe are happening at the federal level that are correct right now. And this is actually around a group of women who help immigrants and non-native English speakers to get through the system and find access to resources and healthcare and other opportunities within the city. So it's a pretty great campaign and something definitely take a look at, especially if you're on your phone or computer right now. It's a good time. We also have a turtle. This is Turtle. And this is a way to make climate and sort of resiliency more fun, to think about it with kids. We actually thought it was going to be better for kids, but it turns out adults like Turtle almost more than anybody else. And so Turtle makes cameos at other events. And the reason we chose Turtle is native to Maryland, but also turtles are adaptable. Land, water, carry their home on their back. It's a good way for us to think about messaging around preparedness. And so we do a lot of work with kids and families to try to make sure that what parents are learning, their kids are also learning and at the same time through games and other sorts of opportunities. And you might be able to tell I really like games, so we've been doing a lot of training with our staff as well. This is actually something that was developed with the Urban Sustainability Directors Network through a similar grant that Maria had in Louisville. It's called the Game of Floods, and we are creating a Baltimore-specific one, but it's actually doing a vulnerability assessment through a game. So it's more fun and engaging, and it really gets people to get beyond the sitting and doing a vulnerability assessment into something more like, wow, we're going to play Monopoly for the afternoon. That sounds great. And these are some of the condition cards and things that you're given. You get to pick a role and identify how much money you have and what your resources are. So we do a lot of integrating of other initiatives. I'm not going to have a lot of time to talk about it, so I'm going to flip through it really fast. But just making sure that we're thinking about other initiatives through the resiliency hubs, bringing in things like our Vacants to Values program, which is strategic demolition, thinking about vacant lot revitalization, so through our Growing Green initiative, providing opportunities for greening vacant lots. We're seeing vacant lots as actually opportunities rather than something that's negative. We're also making sure that we try to measure a lot of the impacts as we go along. So we have 250 heat island sensors up in the communities right now as we're going through and we're doing retrofits to the buildings and the built environment. We're trying to measure over time if we're actually seeing temperature changes. And we're doing a lot with community trainings, which are pretty great. Training people how to plant trees, prune trees, take care of them, get rid of weeds, but also our community emergency response teams. And I think I did that. All right.
Thank you, Kristin. Thank you.